evening all. I'm just making sure it sounds okay. Can everyone hear everything? Okay, is the audio okay? I hope it is. Okay, I'm just going to load the game in. I hope the sound's okay. Can anyone? Okay, cool. That's good. Okay, so I thought we'd carry on our quest to look at Kasparov in the Olympiads. It's a personal interest of mine at the moment. Kasparov, arguably the strongest player, one of the strongest players in the history of the game. So I thought, looking at the Olympiads in particular, where Kasparov was playing against other country teams, he really did try and win all of his games with white or black. So this one, okay, so this is in the 28th Olympiad. Okay, so the 28th Olympiad of 1988. I believe this could have been Olympiad. Actually, Stephen Fry might have gone for the weekend to sort of commentate on it. It could, or this. There's actually two choices. Another Thessalonika Olympiad as well later on, but it might have been this one. This was a very interesting one. So, okay, so against Campora, Daniel Hugo Campora, an Argentinian player, 25-40, but Kasparov had a formidable rating of 27-60. So he's playing board 1 now in this Olympiad. And let's have a look at what happened. So he kicked off actually with c4. And now Campora played knight f6. And we go back now into normal lines because of d4. d4 is now chosen rather than keeping it as an English opening. e6. And Kasparov invites the pin of the Nymzo with knight c3. So black might be tempted to pin the knights, but instead plays d5. So a queen's gambit declines, and it becomes an exchange variation now. C takes d5, fixing a black pawn at the centre, but also liberating the bishop. And now bishop g5, bishop e7, and now e3. So far, doesn't look like there's anything out of the ordinary here. If black usually plays c6, then white's standard plan, which many people may have seen, is just, when after developing, to later go for the dreaded minority attack. That's the general strategic plan, which will lumber black with an isolated pawn here and here, and an outpost square on c5. Now, will this be a standard minority attack plan, or has Kasparov other interests? I've seen recently the concept that actually one has responsibilities to the imbalances of the position, and one shouldn't go for the king, but rather follow the imbalances of the position. Okay, I accept that, but actually one has the choice of opening system. So if one wants to go for the king, how can one influence that with the opening choice? And it's interesting here, although this has started off quietly, look what happens very shortly. After castling bishop d3, knight bd7, it looks like nothing out of the ordinary so far, but this is the first signal. Actually, something is interesting about to occur. Knight ge2. Why would the knight be going to e2 here? From e2, sometimes the knight can go to f4 to add, pressure on d5, but also maybe f3 and e4, or even f3 and g4, because this f pawn might play a supportive role for these aggressive pawn uses. Rook e8, and again we see a signal. White is not content to just castle on the king side here. Queen c2, which gives the option now of castling queenside. And after knight f8, indeed we get a hack attack. Not a hack attack in the sort of crude sense of the word, but kind of leaning towards going for the opponent's king anyway, because white castles queenside. An exciting position really. With the king here and the black king here, how will white open up lines? Isn't this a solid fortress? Aren't there two defensive knights here on f8 and f6? Okay, so bishop e6 was played, and now king b1, which kind of prophylaxis maybe against c5 and rook c8. and shredding open the c file. The king is a little bit safer on b1. Now the tactical move knight g4 is played, which attacks that weakness f2 and challenges the bishop at the same time. The bishops get exchanged off, and now the pawn is supported rather elegantly with attack in mind as well, with knight f4 supporting the pawn, attacking d5. Now if black commits to something like c6, then he's not really opening up this file. Black actually plays knight f6, and now we see f3, and we see here that white is set up quite comfortably without imminent danger to his king on the queen side. Now, as many of you know, casting on the queen side is often riskier because there's a greater area, a greater surface area of responsibility when you castle queen side. So just to get some feedback from you so far, from you guys, who likes white in this position? Who likes black? Who would you say has the advantage? Okay, comments, questions, come on, go for it. I'll give you 20 seconds to ask anything here at this point and express your opinion. Do you think white's doing well, or do you think it's about equal? 20 seconds, evaluate the position. Comments. Anyone? What do you reckon? Do you reckon white's doing okay so far? I like white. Fleethan writes I like white. Anyone on Twitch want to comment here? Anyone else on PlayChess.com? Kenner96, I like white because black can't attack early. All his pieces are on the king side. Yes, a lot of pieces are on the king side here. Chess Tim writes on stream, probably slightly better for white. Could draw back. Black is too defensive. I'll take white. Dirty Butler. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So okay. All right. Let's carry on. So okay. C5. Black tries to get aggressive, and now we see G4. White's getting aggressive. C takes D4. E takes D4. Okay. How can black attack here? He plays Queen D6. Lending support for d5, attacking the knight. The knight is protected with queen d2. Now there looks to be a threat of g5 chasing away the defensive knight, but after a6 that's not played. In fact, knight ce2 is played, adding more support for the knight on f4, and maybe knight g3 to f5. If ever takes, you can imagine the g file being useful for white. So it looks like a nifty plan here to open up the G file at the very least. Rook e7 and now knight g3. Now after knight g6, actually, okay, there's pressure on f4, and the knight for the moment retreats to g2. And actually, I want you to examine the Kasparov knights in this Olympiad, not just in this game, but we're going to see a game later against Nigel Short, and examine the Kasparov knights trying to be naughty against the black king, preparing to be naughty, or working with the pawns on the king side. It's fascinating, I assure you. So remember this game, and if we get to Nigel Short game, compare and contrast the knights in relation to the pawns. Okay, so knight d7. Now h4, okay. h4, there's queen takes g3, that will be a blunder. Prepare that, hg1. Are the knights in the way? They look a bit silly, don't they, here, optically. Okay, rook e8. Now rook df1, as though the game's given away. The f4, f5, that will be pretty nasty for black. There's also, of course, the option all the time of knight f5, knight h5, maybe queen g5 could be handy. For the moment, knight gf8. And the knights coordinate for that lovely f5 square, as well as putting a little bit of pressure on d5, but for the moment d5 is covered. It's more f5 looks a serious concern. If ever black plays g6, that doesn't seem, it seems that would weaken the dark squares, and white might play knight f5 anyway to tear open this g file. King h8. And now actually knight h5, not knight f5. So one knight is now poking away at the black king. These knights are very naughty in this game so far. What are they up to? g6, and now one is left on h5. It's not moved. Instead of moving it, instead f4 is played. So if takes, then f5, and the bishop will be trapped. And this happens now. Very interesting transaction. What will be the outcome of this transaction? Well, if black's having to weaken pawns, black will be isolating pawns here. F and h are about to be isolated if there's ever g takes h. Okay, and this does happen. G takes h, and the bishop's trapped in return to try and restore material equality for the moment. h4. What are these? Poor pawns are fragmented. That's an outcome, clearly. F takes, f takes. So for a pawn, fragmentation, it looks pretty bad. And in fact now g5 gives the impression that white is keen on knight g4 and maybe knight f6 or h6 or just the ie5 now, maybe transfer to the e file. So the dot square complex looks a bit weaker. Also, of course, there might be rook g4 on the cards for taking here, going on to h7. Okay. Rook e7, now knight g4. After rook g7, now knight h6. So again, a knight poking in at black's king on key squares around the king. Knight f7 is threatened, winning the exchange immediately. That's parried, queen moves away. So where is black's attack? Look at this cozy, cheeky king over here. Cozy with a teapot over there. No worries in the world. It's black's king that's facing this onslaught. The poor structure around the king's been dismantled, torn apart, fragmented. Okay, there's an attack on the d pawn. Big deal. Does Kasparov even bother with the d pawn here? No. He just plays g6. Okay. And it looks pretty menacing, this g6. Look at this rook and this rook. This attack looks absolutely extreme. Whatever black's done, I'm pretty sure he's in a regretful mood here, because this doesn't look right for his king to be so, you know, on the onslaught. Look at all of white's pieces, the quality, the aggression of all white's pieces. So hg, check. After king g8, queen h6, threatening mate, because that knight's protected by the rook. Okay, and if rook takes f7, that doesn't look too nice, because maybe even rook takes g6 is vicious, but there must be all sorts of possibilities. It looks pretty lost. Black tries rook h7, and rook takes g6 anyway, smashing through. Knight takes, queen takes, and now of course if the king, well, the king is looking slaughter time. Queen h6, 1-0. Okay, now in this position, okay, black resigned. Let's just spell it out. So imagine black, you know, he's faced with mate in 1. So let's assume rook takes f7. So can anyone spot a forced win here? Oh, it's very easy. I think it's very easy. An easy move you'd play here. If I give you 20 seconds, shout it all out, the winning move in this position. I think I've spotted it with my limited tactical abilities. Okay, I think someone's mentioned it. Anyone else? What does white play here to finish off the game? Yep, Plyphon. Okay, just rook g1 would do, wouldn't it? Because look, the king's cut off anyway. And then it will be mate. Okay. So what on earth went on there? Let's look at that in slow motion to try and dissect it. It looked easy, didn't it? But why? Why on earth was this game easy to get an attack like that? Otherwise, you know, why isn't everyone playing this exchange to get such a position? What on earth happened? So let's try and get some clues here. White was preparing to castle queenside. Someone mentioned c takes d4 looks like a mistake. Black never got a queenside pawn storm started. That's quite correct, yes. if you've got any other theories why black's king was under so much trouble, start shouting them out. Comment. How did black get in trouble as we replay this game? The pressure, emphasized on h7. So bishop e6, maybe that was a passive move. Maybe black can't afford to lose too many moves here. King b1. Possibly, possibly this knight g4. Strategically, knight g4 weakens dark squares. Once this bishop is exchanged, there's potential weaknesses on the dark squares later if g6, because you exchange off that dark square defender with knight g4. Did knight g4 really achieve something? It had to go back later to f6. It didn't really attack f2, did it? So maybe this was a waste of time. Black's weakened the dark squares here. It didn't seem to help. So after knight f4, the knight is ready to be repulsed in any case on g4, and it goes voluntarily back without being kicked back. And then after f3, it already looked quite promising. So has black wasted simply a bit of time, and he's lost the defensive bishop on the dark squares as well? After c5 again, is this another strategic mistake? c4 looks also another strategic disaster, because usually you want to maintain the tension in the position. c4, maybe bishop f5, or even bishop e2. With c4, black would be committing, and then e4 would be even stronger as well. You imagine a rook here. White could change plans to play for ed even, or give white pawn mobility with d pawn and e pawn. So c4 might also look like a strategic mistake. So here already one could argue black was already in a little bit of trouble. C takes d4 probably didn't help. Black has got no pawn storm, no capability to really get a counter attack going against the white king. Queen d6, another move which didn't really achieve much. A single threat. a6, okay, what does it do? Deprive the b5 square? Is it the start of a major counterattack? No. And it looks as though white was able just to maneuver the knights now. So now the knights are before the pawns. The pawns are here. The cavalry is behind the pawns. And the pawns are ready. Not with h4 because of queen takes g3. The pawns are ready to go forward now. And they did go forward. They start, it's like the energy is latent here. The writing is on the wall. White's going to be going forward here. Everything's in position. The pawns are ready to go forward. First, some more key knight maneuvers. Now we're going to go forward with the pawns. f4. Ignoring g6. The knight is not going to retreat. Refusal to retreat. Any cavalry, the knights. And a pawn sack. What was happening here? If takes or something, there's rook f7, and then we'll be on h7. Actually, this didn't happen. Sorry, f takes happened. There was no rook f7, so no need for rook f7. Pardon me. The knight's defending anyway. Kasparov just went forward with his pawns and let black seemingly defend actually across here, but it still didn't help because g6. All the latent power of the pieces has been exerted, okay, and it was just disaster now. Disaster, smashing through. End of game. Okay, let's look at another game. It was made to look easy to how to attack in that game. Sure, bit of a mystery. Can we simulate it as white on a good day? Probably have to examine many games like that because that looks so elegant. The attack. Okay, so let's look at another game. Now against Kirill Georgiev, this was a really meaty, more meaty battle. So Kirill Georgiev playing black, so representing Bulgaria, Uncle Bulgaria Wombles. Anyone watch that? No, anyway, so d4, and okay, so Kirill Georgiev chose knight f6, Kasparov chooses c4, and after e6, again Kasparov is venturing in this tournament to allow people to pin his knight, to allow the Nimzo engine. This is becoming rarer than knight f3, but he's inviting a pin, and the opponent does play the Nimzo, and we see queen c2. Queen c2 is Kasparov's, I think, favourite move against the Nimzo. So the idea is usually to collect, you know, the bishops, the two bishops, get black's dark square bishop, and then try and use these bishops later, maybe open the game up later. But there's a process of trying to shield the bishops and shield against black's counterplay first, and then the bishops later can run riot in the position. So that's the theory. Collect the bishop pair from black with a3. It loses time. So black, at the moment, you know, there's no development in the white position. Black's got development and can try and sharpen things up by opening the position and try and, you know, use the knights and the greater activity. Now, opening the position usually is a bad idea if the opponent has the bishops, but the bishops at the moment, you know, there's tempo gains on the queen available. So black is interested in using the tempo gains on the queen. Knight e4 attacking the queen, and now opens the position, you know, c5, a lot of central tension. D takes, and now knight c6. So other potential tempo gains like knight d4. White plays cd. After ed, we even have this bishop is liberated on this diagonal. Knight f3. A check was played, which aims actually, curiously, to get back the pawn. If b4, then knight takes b4, because we've got this pin. So actually, after bishop d2, black gets the pawn back. This is useful. As some of my recent blitz games demonstrate, I managed to lose a pawn recently with c5, and that cost me the game. But black's getting his pawn back. Okay, but white has the bishop pair. How can white use this bishop pair? At the moment, it would look as though, you know, maybe Menevis would be considering e3, but it looks as though knight b3 is a bit of a menace. Specifics in the position, white has to be treading very carefully here. He plays actually bishop e3, just for the moment locking in these two. He wants a blockade set up on the dark squares, maybe pressure, you know, frontally on the d pawn. This bishop can wait for a moment or two. Knight e4. Now the blockade is set up against the isolated queen's pawn. Pressure is starting to be exerted against the isolated queen's pawn. Bishop e6, and now the knights are chased back. f3. And how now black is also, of course, offering the e6 bishop, but it would repair the pawn chain. So would you take it here? Interesting strategic decision, actually. The opponent's got an isolated queen's pawn. Now that's a theoretical weakness, and we're interested as chess players in exploitable weaknesses, real weaknesses. It's no good the opponent having theoretical weaknesses and you getting mated. You still lose. You want weaknesses you can benefit from, that you can exploit. So how many of you in this position would play knight takes e6? Are you not transferring something away from black's pawn structure? Are you not removing the isolated queen's pawn here with knight takes e6? Who of you would play knight takes e6, and who might just play bishop f2, for example, or something else? What would you play here as white? I'll give you 20 seconds for any comments, questions. Someone would play knight takes e6. Logby, I assume you would play knight takes e6 on the stream. So, play chess.com, bishop f4 pledger. Bishop f4 you play? Okay, that's interesting. Sorry, Flyfin. Case money probably will go bishop f2 to develop kingside. G3 from Gaga. 1204 Lady Gaga. G3. Okay, interesting. Well, actually, you know, white does unisolate the d pawn So how does this pan out here? This unisolating a d pawn. Usually you want to isolate pawns in the opponent's pawn structure, not unisolate them, bring together. Unless you can collect other advantages which might be even more exploitable. So knight takes e6. So the pawns, okay, they're supporting each other. A little bit of dynamism, that's probably no big deal. Bishop c5 looks like a nasty pin. Okay. White has the bishop pair and it's against the two knights. Who will win? You decide. A little joke, sorry. e4. So if takes, then rook takes d6. Pressure on d5 is real. This is really exploiting new weaknesses in black's position. Okay, so rook fe8, and now e takes, king f2. The king's neatly tucked on f2. It's not a problem there. These stumbling knights are going to have difficulty getting to the king here. Okay, so b6, bishop e3, rook e5, defending the d pawn, bishop d3, as though maybe this bishop can reroute, maybe after that the rooks can double. But actually no, the bishop doesn't reroute for the moment. After this move, rook c1, attacking the knight. Knight a5. So c4 looks to be in black's control. Bishop d4, beautiful blockade on the new isolated d pawn. Rook he1, not minding an exchange of rooks. Bishop c3, threatening structural damage with bishop takes a5. Now knight c5. Okay, the knights are having a good time. White is prepared, Kasparov is prepared to give up the light square bishop with rook e5. He doesn't mind knight takes, because rook takes. What will black do about the d pawn? So knight f7, rook e3. Knight goes back. So we have a long and protracted struggle actually for the next 30 moves. Given it's a long and protracted struggle, I'm going to comment this now. Let's have a look at just the general maneuvers. This bishop might want to reroute on this diagonal, and it gives a clue that it might want to. Knight c4, the rook moves. The isolated quick pawn gives a clue it might want to play d4, d3 here. It is supported by both rooks. The knights seem in full support here of that pawn, but bishop a2 puts a spanner in the works immediately. But it's supported, and again we see d4. Isn't this a major threat from black? Now b3, tactical, because knight takes a3, you'd fork both rooks, both knights I mean, would be en prise, attacked. d4, black ignores that. Interestingly, because isn't this diagonal useful? There's a check to be discovered here, and it is soon. Rook takes d7, check, winning a pawn. 2-1 pawn majority, but is this pawn dangerous? So things have really sharpened up here. Pawn's blocked, not minding rook d2. The king can be ready to come in if needed. Takes rook b7, supports his pawn on b5. Black supports his pawn, and the king is now making a journey, an entrance into the black position. There's many possibilities for the king invasion here. Okay. Hi Chess Explained. Hi. As many of you know, I've been doing some dual commentary videos with Chess Explained. He's, I think, going to be on AM soon. He's an FM at the moment, so any comments I'll echo from him. So King d4, the king's making an entrance. This is Kasparov against Kirill Georgiev in the Olympiad of 1988. The king seems to be doing something nasty now. Quality-wise, the king is better than black's king. The king is a strong piece in the ending. So this is becoming an example game. Look at the white's king progress compared to the black king. If there's nothing in serious danger for the king, then why not? It's making inroads. King d6. This is looking really, really dangerous. Where is this king going? He goes back for a moment. Rook h6. Okay, providing a force field for that king to not enter the position anymore, and also attacking that. Bishop b3, evicting the knight from a4, and maybe white is now after rook takes c3. Check. offering now h2, but he's going to get c3, but black will get g2, but then we have 2-to-1 pawn majority to try and exploit on the queen side. And this happens, 2-to-1 pawn majority, but no rush for rook takes c3, keeping a guard of g2. The king comes in, maybe it's going to go to b7, maybe this guy is going to be victimized. Knight d7. Now Kasparov offers the g pawn. It's all about speed now. Is this guy really going to come down quicker than one of these, creating a pass pawn here? Or a5 b5? Is this really going to be compensating? f4, keeping the knight out of e5, making rook h3 possible, making rook e3 check maybe desirable. h5 check, rook d3. Oh, nasty pin. Oh dear, the king is a fighting piece. How can black defend the knight? It's looking bad. Check, away from that pressure on d7. h4, king takes a7, 2-to-0 pawn majority. Can this pawn come to the rescue? Rook g3. Kasparov simply takes it. No, the long range bishop is very, very powerful here on this diagonal. Look at this bishop. It's winning, isn't it? White just takes here, and he can play this bishop move. Look how the bishop dominates the knight here. b6 and b7 look as though it's easy now. Bishop g2. It looks as though it's all over. b6. It's all over, isn't it? The pawns are crashing through. a6. To make sure, you know, black's not getting 2 pawns for the knight, because it's going to sacrifice itself. And now black resigned. Okay, so in this position at move 61, let's say black tries to continue with king a5. What do we do here? What do we do? We don't want to give up 2 pawns, do we, with b8, because takes, and then the king could maybe come back and take this. So what do we do in this position? Is it a sort of zugzwang? Because maybe bishop f1. If we say bishop f1, isn't it a sort of zugzwang? It takes away b5. If the knight moves anywhere, we play b8. If knight c5, we play b8. There's no g5. It looks like bishop f1. It looks like zugzwang. So, a beautiful game in the end. But it seems in this game, and I think we will find this if we do play this system as white, that sometimes it looks very, very dangerous for black's tempo gains in this line. In theory, you collect the 2 bishops. In practice, the white queen is being harassed, and black looks to be getting an aggressive game after c5. Very aggressive game, sacking a pawn, not minding even the endgame here. Because it looks as though there's a lot of pressure points, but Kasparov, he doesn't mind even unisolating a pawn soon, because this bishop c5 is a very concrete approach. He's putting pressure on d5, and the pawn's going to be isolated again anyway after e4 because of this pin. You know, it's not possible to play takes. So he's going to isolate the pawn anyway, and the king's going to be tucked on f2. So he's sorted out some interesting issues already. He's collected the bishop pair, and we get some interesting maneuvers now where it looks as though black was coordinating for a d pawn advance, but the bishop pair was very, very strong in this transaction. If black had gone back here, we didn't really look at this. Say black had gone back here, you know, maybe a move like bishop d4 is not very comfortable for black unless there's something more concrete. Has anyone got something more concrete than bishop d4 in this position? You see, black made a very committal decision at this critical juncture of the game to play d4, and then we saw the winning you know, pawn majority. So why did black have to play d4? Couldn't black have played knight b6? Bishop d4, I don't know. It's a move which is a bit of a general move, you know, restrain, blockade. Nmd7. B4 yeah, B4 is a concrete move. Knight A4, bishop D4. The C4 square, you might not want to give black the C4 square. So that's interesting. Anyway, black chose what he thought was a lesser evil to play D4. Okay, now if you want to analyze this game with engines at home, so I'll have a look at the PGN, or if on YouTube, have a look. I'll upload it to YouTube later and put it through your computer as well. But it looks as though black is fighting an uphill battle, because the two bishops against the two knights, as Chess Explainer just mentioned, I think usually it's close to win for the two bishops. Okay, so this was a dangerous situation anyway. So in the game, black went for this forcing continuation with d4, and okay, so the 2-to-1 pawn majority eventually proved like, and in conjunction with the king, the aggressive king, it was a winning advantage. This bishop, this one remaining bishop, was it was okay to have the one bishop. If we look at the point where the other bishop was lost, let's rewind. The point where the other bishop was lost, if we go back to transition into this ending, well, it was part of this forced transaction that black robbed white of the bishop pair around about here. So the bishop pair was lost, and we end up in theory with this ending, bishop and knight, if the rooks get traded off. And still, you see the light square bishop being another potentially great thing to have in the endgame here, as this became evident. It was just able to sort of stop immediately, the pawn from